Welcome, everybody. This is a panel that I've been looking forward to for quite some time, the future of networks. I'm Rich Karlgaard, the publisher of Forbes, and joining me today, really all-star panel. Seated next to me is Yvette Kanouff, a partner and CTO of JC2 Ventures. That would be John Chambers Ventures. You heard John at lunch. Next to Yvette is Pankaj Patel, venture partner at March Capital Partners. Long time career running a major operation at Cisco, as did Yvette, and is the founder of a stealth startup that you might be able to get some information out of them after the panel. And then we have Quinn Lee, who's the Senior Vice President and Global Head of Qualcomm Ventures, which is a $1 billion fund within Qualcomm investing in the future of networks and 5G. So speaking of 5G, when we think of the future of networks, the first thing that many of us think of is 5G and the role of 5G in the future of networks. So I'm going to direct my first question to Quinn specifically about 5G in the future of networks, and then we'll talk more broadly about the future of networks and the future of networks in enterprises from the other two panelists. So Quinn, at this moment in time, you can't escape reading an article about 5G, about the technology of 5G, about the geopolitical implications of 5G. Where would you say 5G is overhyped at the moment, and where is it underhyped?
Okay. So thanks for appreciate the opportunity to be here. So if you think about the evolution of the wireless network, so when I graduated from graduate school, I actually worked on 3G technology development. So this was back in the late 90s. So each generation of G is roughly about 10 years. So we've been working on the Qualcomm side, been working on 5G over the last 5 to 7 years. That's when the technology development happened, right? So right now, if you look at globally, 5G is being rolled out. I think some stats, 45 plus OEMs has either launched or have deployed commercial devices, and 50 plus mobile operators around the world have actually deployed 5G. So in terms of the speed at which the 5G networks are being rolled out, that's actually faster than 4G networks, right?
And give us an idea of the difference in scale, the difference in power consumption, speed, bandwidth, all of that, going from 4G to 5G. What kind of leap are we talking about?
Right, so in 5G networks, you can imagine one of the analogies that we use is you could potentially get almost fiber optic-like speed to the device, to the mobile device, right? So you get almost wireline broadband speed to mobile devices. So speed is one thing. There's also, for many applications where latency is very important, so you can get the data at much lower latency with 5G versus 4G, right? So I would say that in terms of what's reality, the 5G networks are being rolled out. I think what's coming is many of the use cases of applications, right? What do we 5G used for, right? When LTE was deployed many years ago, we didn't imagine the use cases like Uber or Lyft, right? Without a high-speed wireless network, without the smartphone, you wouldn't have any of these services like Uber or Lyft, right? So I think there's many use cases will come up in the next 2 to 5 years, which probably don't really exist today.
Well, and that's what you must think about. I mean, commanding a $1 billion fund that invests in companies that will take advantage of 5G or be drivers of 5G, everything around the 5G ecology, right. I'm assuming.
Right.
What are some of the areas that you're thinking about today where you can predictably say the use case will be this, even if we don't know what all of them will be?
Sure. So we actually announced a $200 million fund to invest in along the 5G ecosystem. There's 3 buckets of area we focus on. One is use cases. So example use cases would be, some of the example would be cloud gaming would be one example. The other one would be in a concert setting where the network's usually congested, everybody's taking pictures, uploading videos. So you can imagine an environment where simultaneous video upload or streaming could happen in a concert where there's a ton of people there. So that's another use case of 5G. And then on the infrastructure side, which my colleague here will talk about as well, we see a lot of the networks are being increasingly distributed and virtualized, right? So instead of dedicated proprietary hardware boxes, you see the network being done in software, running on servers. So the networks actually, both the radio access network as well as the core networks, being increasingly virtualized. So we're seeing trends happening in that area, so we invest in both on use case as well as the networks.
Well, great. I want to come back and ask you later about your investment philosophy, the sort of size range, round range, whether you're driven chiefly by growing the Qualcomm ecology or you're looking for ROI. You're going to say both, but I'll ask you that a little later. Yvette, stepping back, Quinn talked about sort of 5G as the thing that most people talk about when they talk about the future of networks, but when you see the future of networks as being something bigger than 5G, describe what you mean by that.
Well, I think, 5G is certainly a big, tipping point, and it's a big transition. But the key is that we have an ever-needing growth of bandwidth, right? So if you think that we're going to go 13 times the current bandwidth on our mobile service, 10 times on our broadband service, Wi-Fi is going to increase in such a massive way, what do we have to do behind the scenes? And so if we think about what used to happen with streaming, and it was very expensive to support streaming from a central location, and so we had to start caching deeper into the network, and we created these things called content distribution networks, or CDNs. And I think that we're at that place now. When you look at the 5G growth, when you look at the intermetro growth, and that people are using more bandwidth inside a metro as opposed to across the planet, we have to also think about bringing compute deeper into the network. And so you have these concepts of mobile edge compute, or the intelligent edges, and how it is that we're bringing compute closer to the subscriber. On the CDN side, we're not talking about caching in our mobile devices or caching in very distributed, super close ways. And on the compute side, we're now talking about how close to the subscriber we can get. So that's one big trend. And I think in general, when it comes to the future of networks are so complex and continuing to get complex. The very first thing we need is simplicity. I think the second thing we need, and by simplicity I mean software defined, very easy to run. It can't be these complex networks. As we're getting more complex, we have to think about how we make the operation of that simple. The second thing would be we have to really focus on flexibility. Quinn gave a very nice summary of the fact that we're in a whole transition as to what is the business going to be with 5G. What are we running the future of networks for? We don't know all of that yet. We talk about the mobile networks and B2C. B2C is the largest part of 5G, but we're not all going to pay 3 times more for more bandwidth. So then you move to B2B, and now you're talking about B2B to X, right? So that's the new thing. So as we figure that out, the networks have to be flexible to allow tear down of network slices or whatever it might be in an easy way. And I think then we have to have security and policy, and then the fourth and final item is automation and intelligence of the network. And so those would be the areas I think to focus on.
And I'm going to come back and ask you about the investment philosophy of JC2 when it comes to the future of networks also. Pankaj, you ran a multi-billion-dollar business inside of Cisco. You were the chief development officer at Cisco. Describe taking off where Yvette left off on enterprise. What is the future of enterprise networks?
Sure. So if I can, Rich, if I can comment just on one thing on 5G, and then I'll go to the enterprise, because it's so near and dear to all of us. I think one of the things that this might give us more opportunity for the different use cases and applications, which is typically we talk about amazing broadband speeds and whatnot, but we have not actually focused as much on the machines and the objects and the devices. And 5G for the first time, which was not feasible with the 4G, will give us an amazing opportunity to enhance the overall experience, because there will be now machine-to-machine communication feasible, possible, and really achieve few things that we always wanted to do. So I just want to make sure that we bring that piece along with the people aspect. On the enterprise networking, something that actually Yvette said earlier, I'm going to expand on that. Number one, everything in enterprise, slowly but surely, is getting virtualized. And we see the incarnation of that. We have been watching it for the last few years. Clearly, something like SD-WAN has been in a pretty high gear, but it's going to be much more than SD-WAN. It's going to be to what Quinn was saying earlier, where before it was not possible or feasible to move a lot of those software stacks to the servers. Now you're able to. So now you're able to consume those services from the cloud. So I think that's one major trend which will just keep on going on. Number two, it's about another thing that Yvette was talking about, which is the edge compute. You will see edge compute and 5G, in some sense, they go kind of like hand in hand, because there is a need for edge compute, especially for applications that Yvette talked about, for mobility, for CDN. There are many more applications. By the way, we already are seeing that the lot of processing that took place 2 years ago in the central data centers, a lot of it is actually moving to the edge. And that trend will continue to happen for a long time. While 5G is obviously in news every day, and we are going to see big and better things, I also believe that enterprise networks in particular are going to adopt Wi-Fi 6 pretty aggressively, because wireless matters in enterprise tremendously. And Wi-Fi 6 brings its own, it can deliver up to 9.6 gigabits per second, which is a lot more than a lot of people would need. But when you connect to many, many devices, it can give you tremendous advantages, better battery life, and better security. So I think you will see that. You'll also see a lot more analytics and lot more importance of analytics, rich analytics within enterprise moving forward.
Yeah, that strikes me as the biggest enterprise breakthrough of all. I mean, if you have essentially unlimited computing power in the cloud, increasing computing power on the edge, and you have no latency, basically.
Exactly.
Then the ability to, that's just going to drive a whole new era of AI-driven enterprise apps.
Exactly, and this is where I want to come back to Yvette's point about the simplicity and automation. Things are going to be highly automated. It will not happen overnight. It will take many years to achieve that. But think about today, for example, in a given enterprise, for a CIO, a typical CIO, not all, but typical CIO doesn't have the visibility into the problems that occur in a given enterprise. 40% of the times, the users report the problem before the IT staff knows about it, right? That's not going to last too long, okay? This is, to me, the automation and what these new technologies can bring it can change the dynamic dramatically, which will contribute to tremendous productivity improvement and everything else within the enterprise.
Let's switch gears for all of you. Oh, Quinn, go ahead.
Yeah, and I just maybe one comment on what Pankaj was saying in terms of, I think in terms of 5G networks, in the beginning, you're going to see handset, smartphones, basically is the early initial deployments of 5G. But I think the use case of 5G, as Pankaj mentioned, you'll see industrial settings, you can deploy 5G networks or private networks. That's very, very specific use for private networks that's very well managed, that gives the plant much more visibility into the network, as well as the low latency and high security use cases. Wi-Fi 6 is going to be there, but I think there's also a big use case of private networks that's based on 5G. So that's going to happen a little bit further down the road.
I think another thing to mention that there's so many thoughts when it comes to this future of network. So, but one thing that's really important is all of these emergency services and all these critical services. So if we're going to have self-driving cars, our traffic lights are going to change themselves, everything in our life is going to depend on technology. If we don't have this automation and we don't have this simplicity of the network behind it, we can't wait for me to call and say the traffic light's not working. Oh, guess what? My car crashed. The network has to be perfect. It has to be simple. It has to be automated. It has to be secure. So those things weren't as important when we could say, oh, look, I'll just reload my page. And we're just not there. 10 millisecond latency and it's life or death in the future that's going to run on these networks changes the game.
Yeah, I interviewed Scott Guthrie, who runs Microsoft Azure, in the end of January, and he said 2020 to 2030 will be the decade when everything physical goes digital. I mean, everything physical has got this just immense digital component to it, where data is being collected, transmitted, analyzed in real time. Well, let's switch gears and talk about the remaining time we have left, about how you see the you're all in the investment field now, and so we'll start with you, Yvette, and what is JC2? What's its approach? I mean, John described that you'd like to have so many unicorns, in such a period of time. Some of these unicorns are going to come out of this area. It is the area that you all know at JC2. Where do you get involved? Strictly at the startup level, the early stages of investing?
Well, I think this is one of the really critical shifts. So one of the things that we look for at JC2 is these market transitions. And you want to capture a market transition. You want to be in that first or second spot, as John talked about at lunch. It's really, that's really critical. So in the future of networks, what is that transition? And I think it comes back to these 4 points. We all know 5G, we all know the performance, we all know the latency. So you're either enabling something that's going to make money, as opposed to saying, okay, I'm going to build it and then you're just going to pay more. So enabling something that's going to use that network in the right way, or who is going to participate in that market transition? It's not just a startup. It can be a startup that's in any of those 4 areas, creating the network of simplicity, creating the performance, security. There's many areas to invest in there. But it's also, how do you partner with making sure you're going to capture the market transition? So John just mentioned at lunch a small bit about the importance is the CEO, and the importance is, what it is that you do he'll go talk to customers. So if you have a great CEO and you have great customers and you've aligned a use case for 5G, as Quinn talked about, or whatever it might be, or an automation need, that's worth investing in, because you have something that's a great idea, it solves a problem, it leverages a market transition, and you have the customer base to make it real, or partner base to make it real.
And where do you participate in what levels of financing, what sort of the size of rounds that you do? So
very flexible on rounds. I think that there's no magic. The thing is to be right at that beginning cusp. That's what we try to do. Is to be at that cusp where you've established your product, you've established your position, you've built your partnerships, but you're waiting for that to take the big leap into a large growth stage. If you're in that larger growth stage already, that late stage is not typically what we look for. Is we look for that where you're really at the beginning cusp of it. Mm-hmm. So that could be an A, B.
Yeah. And Quinn, and then I want to get your thoughts on that, and then we'll go to Pankaj.
Sure. So in terms of area we invest in outside of 5G, we invest in areas that Qualcomm has business interest in. So we have a business in mobile, 5G, obviously very important. IoT, automotive, AI cuts across different verticals. So we invest in all these verticals. The key strategic reason for us to do that is to find customers, emerging players in the marketplace. By working with them, they can create demands for our technology, right? So we're looking for customers, potential customers, partners we can work with to help us grow our ecosystem. So that's the goal. In terms of stages, we tend to go earlier, so A, B, seed round. We want to get to know the company early, as Yvette mentioned, at the point where the business could potentially, right before the inflection point, if you will. That's when we can bring the resource of Qualcomm to help these companies scale their business.
And as you think, you have a dual purpose course. One is to build the Qualcomm ecology, and you don't want to lose money doing that either.
Right.
But do you? But if you start bringing in partners from Silicon Valley, pure VC firms, they're going to want they're only going to invest if they see the ROI potential. How do you weigh the two? You know, what's good for the Qualcomm ecology or ecosystem, and what's good for the pocketbook?
So I have a very simple answer. We look for companies on a standalone basis with a good business, fundamentally, because it's our view that if the company themselves don't succeed, there's very little strategic value back to Qualcomm. So foremost, we actually very aligned with other financial investors because they want to make a return on their investment. That's only under the assumption that the company is going to do well, and we have the same objective, right? If they do well, then there's a potential connection we can make with Qualcomm. We can grow together, but the companies themselves don't do well. There's very little strategic value we can drive.
Are there any models of successful corporate venture capital efforts that you look at and you say, this company's done that well through many investment cycles? They've got this. They are both building out their ecosystem and they're making it profitable while they do that.
You want me to mention names other than us?
Well, yeah. I mean, I probably shouldn't say Intel Capital because you're Qualcomm after all, but I believe they've got like $20 billion under management.
Yeah, I think we work with many that the corporate venture folks that's been in the ecosystem a long time. So Cisco is actively investing, for example. Microsoft through their fund called M12, they're actively investing. We partner with them. And Intel Capital has been around a long time. So there's many these big tech corporations. They all have their investing arms. They all been doing it a long time and have very experienced in terms of investing.
Pankaj, you're a venture partner at our host March Capital Partners, and
the best.
The best.
The best.
They are. Jamie, I'm going to write in Jamie's name for president. I think. I'm
Jamie
just
was
torn
picking
on
on me earlier, so.
Yeah, I mean, he's the only one that can build the coalition.
Pankaj got crossed off the Alaska
Yes,
list
I
already.
know. I know.
Well, you'll be a Secretary of State. So describe how you make the decisions around the network investments. What's sort of the overall philosophy, and then in the specific, what do you look for opportunistically?
So I get involved with March actually for a pretty broad spectrum. It's not just limited to something I have worked in for years. So it's anything in AI to security to enterprise software to infrastructure. I look at actually pretty much all of them. So one of the things that is a bit different with March compared to the other venture firms is that March also has an advantage of working with the two boutique studios in Silicon Valley, where they actually scout and they really do the seed funding into these startups. And then March sometimes might get involved very early on, but typically they will get involved later on. So their typical investment is in B, C, or later, right? So when we look at that, we are always looking for, one of the things that we look for is whether somebody is truly addressing market transitions, right? And not just simply focus on competition, because that would be a wrong way to really take an approach. But how big a disruptive play this is going to be in a given industry, right? This is how, by the way, investment by March into ASAP and Unifor came about, because they really saw an opportunity to say, hey, this is truly a disruptive play, and we have to be in this much longer, right? So that's why it's been typically the direct investment into seed is not that common. I mean, my startup is one of the few that they have invested in seed, but typically we as a March, we don't invest in seed, right? It's more on ABC and follow-ons. And the check varies. I mean, it could be anywhere from 5, 10 to 25, 30 and higher, right? I think also importantly, the company has ability to really bring on a lot of other joint investments by others, right? So when even though we may be investing 20, 25 or something in a given round, we can really bring in a lot of LPs to co-invest with us. And we actually encourage that many times.
Okay. Well, thank you. The clock tells me we're out of time. Otherwise, I would like to go on for much more time. So let's give a big hand to our panelists.